Hold your breath. Make a wish. Count to 3. Come with me, and you'll be in a world of pure imagination. Take a look, and you'll see into your imagination.
Hello, my dear friends. Welcome back to another episode of Critically Curious. This is Judy, and I'll be your host for today. So that was a bit of a creepy intro. I hope that was a creepy intro because I don't know if there's a better way to portray the subject. It is a very odd subject that we're going to talk about today. Something that you may have never heard before, some words, some terms, the text and the theorist, whose name is Jean Baudrillard, a French sociologist, philosopher, and theorist who wrote the work that we're going to be talking about today called Simulacra and Simulation. But the reason I wanted to talk about this subject and this text is because, I'll be honest, I spend a lot of time on social media, and as a on-the-cusp millennial slash Gen Z, maybe I'm being a little bit hard on myself, but to me it feels like I am constantly being consumed by social media. But this question was sort of brought up in my mind because I frankly have a lot of friends in my peer group who don't spend that much time on Instagram, TikTok, but I also have friends, usually in the younger generation, who spend copious amounts of time on it. And as I talk to both groups of people, sometimes I feel like I'm like really in the loop, and then other times I'm like, what is going on?
Girl, what's going on?
And then I had this sort of realization that there are some things in this world of social media, particularly on TikTok and Instagram, where if you're not on this platform continuously, or if you're not surrounded by people who also use this platform, you don't really know what's going on. And even depending on your interests, your personal preferences, and the way the algorithm caters and creates your own feed, you may not even know some of the big things that are going on this platform just because you don't engage with that specific type of content. But then adding on to that, how much time our generation actually spends on social media and how much of our minds and our ideas and thoughts are shaped by the things we see, by the things we hear on it, it made me wonder, is this reality?
Is this the real life?
Oh, this is Patrick.
Is this just fantasy?
No, this is Patrick.
Is social media creating an alternate dimension of reality, one in which we live without even realizing it? For example, I was really a big fan of the show Bridgerton. I loved season 1. I binge watched the entire thing. But because I was a big fan of it and I was following its content on Instagram, I actually found out about the whole Bridgerton musical thing on TikTok. If you haven't seen it, it's pretty cool. They wrote like original songs based off of the show. And it was just a completely creative idea. And I realized that even some of my friends who know this show don't really know this aspect if they're not that exposed to social media. And then of course, as someone who consumes a lot of fashion related content, there is just certain trends, certain images, certain kinds of videos, even certain music tracks.
Northside coolin' shawty, Northside coolin' shawty.
I'm in love. I'm in love.
I will instantly recognize and I'll be like, oh yeah, this is that kind of video. But no one outside of this world, no one who doesn't consume this specific type of content will actually understand or know what I'm talking about because I live in this very specific type of reality that is completely virtual. But it's like all my influencer friends on Instagram, they'll know exactly what I'm talking about. So it's almost like we're speaking another language, a coded language that can only be interpreted through the types of content that we're exposed to on social media. Maybe that's why I feel a little bit awkward. Like, I don't bring up things like trends on social media with my friends outside of social media. I'll send DMs or photos, memes with people who understand these things, but it's a little bit awkward to talk about these social media phenomenons outside of the platform. Like, it's okay to like text about it and like DM about it, but if I try to actually say it verbally out loud, it's weird. I don't know if this is just a me thing, but for me, bringing that virtual reality, that world of social media, this world that's very contained in this my phone, in this phone, to the outside world and verbalizing it, to me is very odd. And I can't bring myself to do it naturally. It just doesn't feel right. Like, jokes and memes, they just don't come off in the same way. And I think a lot of them lose their meaning when they lose the visual aspect. Some things just shouldn't be said out loud. It just doesn't work. Which is so interesting because so much of communication in the past, in ancient histories, was verbal. And that's when I got to thinking about this work by Baudrillard. It's a work that really impacted me and really got me to think about realities around me in a deeper way that I never thought before, which, I mean, like, I love metaphysical stuff. I'm gonna try to go through as briefly but also as thoroughly as possible what this text is about and why I think it's relevant. Honestly, even as I say this, I don't actually know if simulacra and simulations do apply to social media in this way. I'm a verbal processor, so as I'm saying all this, I'm sort of processing it with you and learning things with you guys. So don't mind me if later down the line in this video, I totally contradict myself and I'm like, oh wait, I don't think that's what I thought. I think this is actually true. So yeah, with that being said, let's just dive right into it. So first, a little tiny bit of background about the author. Baudrillard is known as the high priest of postmodernism. If you don't know what postmodernism is, I have added a handy dandy little definition for you. Postmodernism is a late 20th century style and concept in the arts, architecture, and criticism that represents a departure from modernism. Like I said in my previous video, as a movement that succeeds another movement and tries to go in the opposite direction. So it's trying not to be like modernism. It's trying to respond to modernism in a new way. And he actually sort of coined the term postmodernism. He also coined hyperreality. Now, I didn't really like the dictionary definitions for this word, so I actually mixed a couple of definitions together to form my own. Hyperreality is when reality and simulations of reality get so blurred that you can't distinguish one from the other. Some people consider hyperreality to be just an exaggerated version of reality, or it can also be taken to mean something that's extremely realistic, too close to reality. And it sort of makes sense that Baudrillard coined this term around this era, which was the 1980s, because previous to this generation, the idea of virtual media wasn't really a thing. So in his work, Simulacra and Simulation, Baudrillard is going to go through some specific definitions and ideas of what simulacra is to him. And I'm going to be mainly pulling from the first essay called The Procession of Simulacra. So first, let's look at the title. Titles can be confusing, and it's really important to get the right context. Now, if you look on a dictionary, there is a definition for procession. This is not what Baudrillard is talking about. He's saying more like it precedes. Simulacra precedes reality rather than the other way around. These signs or these simulations come even before what's real. As for simulacra, he defines it as copies or signs of things that never had an original or no longer have an original. If a simulation is trying to recreate something that is original or real, by the time you reach the point of simulacra, that copy of the original is the only thing left. The original or the real thing is gone. Just right off the bat, the first quote, "The simulacrum is never what hides the truth. It is truth that hides the fact that there is none. The simulacrum is true." This honestly really makes me laugh because I have read Ecclesiastes. If you don't have any sort of contextual background about the Bible, which is where Ecclesiastes is from, you're probably gonna just buy this. This is definitely not from Ecclesiastes, but he's not trying to commit heresy or anything. He's just trying to make a point by saying that if we don't check our facts, we're not gonna know where anything comes from. Like, where does this originate? The main example that he uses for a perfect paragon of simulacra is Disneyland. Disneyland is the perfect example because it simulates or tries to make seem real an idea, a world that doesn't actually exist in reality. So it's trying to make something as realistic as possible, but that thing that they're trying to make realistic is not real, but everyone believes it is, or at least you want to believe it is, because that's part of the attraction, that's part of the business. So I'll get more into that later. And then he goes on to talk about what exactly simulation is. Simulation is no longer that of a territory, a referential being, or a substance. It is a generation by models of a real without origin or reality, a hyperreal. The territory no longer precedes the map, nor does it survive it. It is nevertheless the map that precedes the territory. The procession of simulacra. The simulacra precedes the reality. The simulation comes first. And he refers to it as the desert of the real, which is this kind of abstract, grand, very artistic way of saying the real is gone, but there is this empty desert, missing the oasis of reality, a very realistic shadow of what was once real. And this is where he starts getting really complicated about the idea of simulacra, and honestly, I'm just guessing a lot of the language that he's trying to use and making my own inferences rather than trying to define every single thing that he says. It's really important when you read these kind of texts from other periods to understand the cultural context, the way that language was used at that time. The English language, not unlike other languages, changes constantly. We know that things that meant something in Shakespeare's time is not what it means today. Obviously, we have to apply that to every generation. He's basically saying that okay, let me just tell you what he actually says. The era of simulation is inaugurated by a liquidation of all referentials. Referentials as in original sources where the sign or the symbol came from. Liquidation, gone, disappeared, like liquid, just melts. Things that the sign once referred to is gone. Doesn't matter. It is no longer a question of imitation, nor duplication, nor even parody. It is a question of substituting the signs of the real for the real. In this hyper-reality of simulacra, the simulation is actually more important to the people in this reality than the real. And then he goes on to use like very dramatic language about it. He's like, oh, this is a system of death. The real will never have a chance to produce itself. How it started out is that there was the real thing, and someone depicted it in an image or a copy. But then people kept reproducing this copy instead of reproducing the real thing. And so now, this chain of ideas or thoughts or whatever it is was just recreated from this copy. And to me, honestly, I think that these definitions can be reworked. You always want to consider that one author or one theorist's definition of a term or word, because language is so subjective and it's really colored by your culture, your background. It's really important to take the context and to sort of explain it to yourself in your own words, same way that I'm going to try to do now when Baudrillard tries to distinguish between his idea of simulation and dissimulation. To dissimulate is to pretend not to have what one has. To simulate is to feign to have what one doesn't have. One implies a presence, the other an absence. But it's more complicated than that because simulating is not pretending. And then he uses this example of someone who fakes an illness versus someone who actually acquires the symptoms of an illness on purpose. Whoever fakes an illness can simply stay in bed and make everyone believe he is ill. Whoever simulates an illness produces in himself some of the symptoms. Therefore, pretending or dissimulating leaves the principle of reality intact. The difference is always clear, it is simply masked, whereas simulation threatens the difference between the true and the false, the real and the imaginary. In a simulation, the emphasis is on the fact that reality becomes so closely imitated, so accurately depicted that it becomes impossible to tell the difference between the two. I feel like this is a bit more of an obscure explanation that he tries to use, so I'm actually going to move on to the topic of how he exemplifies simulacra through that very interesting image of Disneyland as a symbol of America and American ideologies. Now, the danger for Baudrillard that he highlights with simulacra is that there is a sort of loss of objective reality, objective truth. There is just so many facts out there, things that people can see and visualize as reality but aren't necessarily rooted in truth. He also goes on to talk about 4 stages of how that image or simulacra actually comes to be. I'm not going to go into much depth about it, but if you want to check it out, you can read the text yourself. Reading. So for Baudrillard, Disneyland is a perfect model of all the entangled orders of simulacra. It is first of all a play of illusions and phantasms. This imaginary world is supposed to ensure the success of the operation. But what attracts the crowds the most is without a doubt the social microcosm, the religious miniaturized pleasure of real America, of its constraints and joys. One parks outside and stands in line inside. One is altogether abandoned at the exit. Only phantasmagoria in this imaginary world lies in the tenderness and warmth of the crowd and in the sufficient and excessive number of gadgets necessary to create the multitudinous effect. The contrast with the absolute solitude of the parking lot, a veritable concentration camp, is total. Thus, everywhere in Disneyland, the objective profile of America, down to the morphology of individuals and of the crowd, is drawn. Disneyland is a perfect example of his idea of simulacra. What it's trying to copy is this world, a world of all these Disney stories that we've seen in movies. The goal and the objective and what draws people in and makes people spend their money is the fact that it seems so real. And it feels real. And he goes on even further to say that this symbolizes the profile of America, I guess like American culture, and the use of marketing and visuals to create this illusionary world for consumers, for people to become invested in a fictional world, invested in realities that don't exist outside of this park. Which It's a pretty interesting concept, and I think this is where the social media parallel can draw in. The biggest marketing ploy of Disneyland is that it sets itself up to be so real and so much better than the real world out there. Disneyland exists in order to tie that it is the real country, all of real America, that is Disneyland. Disneyland is presented as imaginary in order to make us believe that the rest is real, whereas all of Los Angeles and the America that surrounds it are no longer real but belong to the hyper-real order and to the order of simulation. It is no longer a question of false representation of reality or ideology, but of concealing the fact that the real is no longer real, and thus of saving the reality principle. I do like how he goes on to say that this imaginary world almost is sort of a nostalgia for childhood, a nostalgia for simpler times and simpler minds. This world wants to be childish in order to make us believe that the adults are elsewhere in the real world and to conceal the fact that true childishness is everywhere. That it is that of the adults themselves who come here to act the child in order to foster illusions as to their real childishness. Honestly, like, this is kind of true. A lot of adults I know, especially ones who grew up in that area and just grew up loving classic Disney films, they love Disneyland just as much as children. It really sets itself up to be this magical place of fantasy where you can just walk in and forget about the world outside. I think that this is a very similar effect to what happens when we enter the world of social media, particularly visual mediums like Instagram, TikTok. I'll talk mostly about Instagram because that's what I'm familiar with, although I'm sure TikTok can have its own separate category. But on Instagram, it's very much a curated world where your feed, everything you see, even on your Explore page, is curated just for you by the algorithms. On Instagram, there's a little bit more of that visual uniformity. Generally, what you see is a little cleaner, it's a little more polished, edited, which is kind of what the platform of Instagram is still mainly for. Even if you see the reels on Instagram, still filled with the millennial generation, the pre-TikTok generation, more visually specific curated aesthetics. Because of that, when you enter a feed, you just scroll down and you're in this world. And for that rectangle, for that little bit of space on your screen, as long as you're scrolling through that same feed, this is the world you're in. For your following feed, obviously, you may not see exact uniformity, but it's still things that you want to see. Instagram's algorithm is not going to show you a bunch of content that you're either going to strongly disagree with or won't like at all. And obviously, because it's still an AI system, it can't read your mind completely. There are ways to get around that and to sort of build your algorithm or to like trick the algorithm system, but generally most people aren't going to bother to do that. Most people are going to stick to what they want to see, and so your feed, your news, the information that you get will be specifically curated for you, both visually and informatively. So what kind of implication does this have? I mean, just first of all, we are in a generation where we just receive so much information through social media and we don't really look to outside sources. Traditional news, journals, magazines, credible sources, credible I say, not in that social media informants can't be credible, and I don't think that all news sources are unbiased either, but there's generally a higher expectation in terms of education and qualification that goes on into certain media platforms versus social media where anyone can write anything. Because it caters to the kind of information that you want to read or you want to see, it's pretty easy to find things that you like and to feel like, oh, this is a really helpful, informative, valuable source of information. But the issue is that a lot of the information that you see can be biased by your algorithm and by your preferences. And I say all this not really knowing exactly how algorithms work. I barely knew what an algorithm was before all this, but I think that just looking at my own feed and seeing the kind of content that I receive, I can see it's pretty biased in terms of at least my preferences, what kind of visuals I want to see. And I kind of mentioned this in my previous video where I talk about how I see very specific body types on my feed, the type of body that I find pleasing and a type of visual that I think is attractive, and it'll actually like show me those. And this YouTuber actually talked about how TikTok has a beauty algorithm. It was really interesting and informative. It's also impactful not just because of the information we receive, but because of the narrow worldness that it sets us up in and the way it can hinder but also open up new types of communication with others. For example, my parents' generation, even like my peers or friends who aren't really on social media, like they're just not gonna see the same kind of things that I see. Relating to them through these things will not be easy when I realize, oh, I can't talk about these things with you because it just doesn't have the same meaning when I say it out loud versus just when you see it on the screen. And so it complicates language, it complicates communication, but it can also be a foster for more diverse and wide ranges of conversation, and I think that is a big plus factor. And it has revealed a lot of different issues to me. For my feed, there's a lot of things about like sustainability, fast fashion, but that's actually another major thing. A lot of people that I follow and a lot of the content that I watch, because of my interests in that area, will focus on issues like sustainability and fast fashion. But that doesn't mean that every single person on Instagram or every single person outside of Instagram cares about those issues. And it's definitely not to say that those issues are not important. And I think it's important that there are niches of each type of issue and community centered around it, because those are the people who will care about that issue and will advocate for it. Just because there's too many people and too many different types of people and interests in the world for everyone to focus on every single issue, I'm not gonna have the time and resources or the capacity or even the desire to focus on every single important issue going on in the world, and that's just not an expectation you can have. So I do think it's nice that people who do care about a certain issue can gather together and have a sort of community, but at the same time you have to be careful in not judging others or not criticizing others for not necessarily focusing on the exact same issue as you. I think it's an unrealistic expectation. I think what matters to me, because of my preferences, my culture, my place in life, will definitely narrow my focus, and because of the algorithm, it'll narrow my content and my exposure to these specific types of issues, and then it'll make me think, oh, these are the biggest issues in the world right now, nothing else matters, which is not true. There are so many other things that I could be focusing on and that I should care about that don't show up on my feed at all. I'm sure it goes the same for you, but I know that because of the certain content that I prefer, I'll be geared towards focusing on issues like sustainability, fast fashion, body image. It just makes sense in a world that's becoming so big and so populated, and where even the world of social media is very populated, extremely oversaturated with the same types of information, the same types of content creators. And so I guess I want to be that person who says, you know, look at everything from a little bit of a farther stance, like step back, try and gain a more objective view of things and not just get consumed by the issues you see right now on your feed, because that can really have an impact on you and your mental state. And it can even guilt you into caring about things that maybe you don't have the capacity to care about right now, or maybe you are just called to care for other things, you know, based crying baby, oh. Use that objectivity to really try and step back and distinguish your real world, your real life with the world on social media. And so I really encourage you to see social media in this way and to realize that as much as it can depict reality in a faithful way, remember that some of these issues are actually just perpetuated and contained within social media. Like all that drama about TikTokers and about certain beauty standards, all of these issues, they were not only created by social media, but they have maintained their life through social media, and they're being criticized through social media. Like everything just exists in this bubble, and once you step out of that and you realize there is a reality outside of that, and there are other issues that will probably be really important to you. Once you see that, I think you'll start feeling a little less guilty for not immersing yourself into all the issues that you see on your social media. And maybe this is just a message for myself. Maybe that's it. Maybe I'm just trying to learn this and I'm like verbally processing with you guys. All that to say, that was just kind of like a brain explosion from me to you. But I hope this was enjoyable. I hope this was informative. If you want to see more videos like this, definitely hit subscribe. Let me know in the comments what kind of other content you want to see. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.